I think political leadership, political will, whatever we call it, is an essential concomitant of what we're trying to do. Obviously, I highlight it because I work in that area, but I think that's totally beyond question. The last lesson from Vikram Chand was of a moral core and saying if we have really become like this, we are really in a bad shape. I totally agree with you, sir. We are in a bad shape. There is no if and there is no but. The developing the moral core, I agree, is the answer. But I think that would take generations. And we are not in a situation to wait for generations. We need to do what we can here and now and hope that the moral core develops as we go along. So these are not questions but an observation. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Chokar. Can we have a mic for Katyayani here?
So I want to ask basically...
Sorry, there's somebody else who's... Okay, so let's take Beliappa first and Katyayani next. Yes, Beliappa.
Yeah. So just to confirm, so paying a bribe is illegal under any circumstances?
Could you please introduce yourself and the organization?
Yeah, so my name is Beliappa. I work for the Center for Internet and Society. We work on things like privacy and freedom of speech on the internet. Okay, so the question is, so I assume, if I understand correctly, paying a bribe for any reason whatsoever is illegal. I want to know the logic as to why it's illegal if you pay a bribe for something that you deserve, for a service you deserve, because that makes reporting it more difficult, I would assume. So is there any logic, or is that true?
Can I request Dr. Sharma to take that question, please? Dr. Sharma, the question is, why is it illegal to pay a bribe if you're paying the bribe to get a service that you're obliged to get, that you're legally entitled to get? So why should that be illegal? Why should you be treated as a criminal or somebody who's violated the law if you paid a bribe to receive a service that you're entitled to receive?
Actually, the law says that the person who pays the bribe is also responsible, but now most serious is in February they are amending the Prevention of Corruption Act and they are putting this as a very severe punishment for the bribe giver also. You know, it's like this. I mean, I don't support what I'm saying, I'm just giving you the explanation which is given. So it's not my view, okay? They say, if you're a citizen, you also have a duty to make sure you don't give a bribe. And if nobody gives a bribe, there'll be no bribe giving because it's an exchange. So if exchange one party is not there, then bribe giving will not happen. That is the conceptual, you know, completely theoretical sort of explanation. So if possibly that may be much more relevant in the, you know, that organized corruption, you know, where both benefit. See, the other logic is in the organized corruption, in public-private partnership, if they get a little advantage because tweaking the conditions. So if they get 100 rupees, they may pay a bribe of 10 to 15 rupees and the advantage of 80-85 rupees with them. So this is more applicable for that than the retail type. In retail type, the citizen doesn't get any benefit. That's his right. So it depends on which type it is, and I think they've confused the three and put it, that's all.
Yeah.
Can I?
Ironically, there is a Supreme Court judgment in the Jharkhand Mukti Morcha case where the Supreme Court said that the bribe giver is at fault, but bribe taker is not at fault so long as he has voted according to what he has promised to vote. And that judgment has been widely criticized. That is when the Narasimha Rao government was kept in power by 1 or 2 votes. But it is a very distorted interpretation of this fact. And one of these economic advisors to the Prime Minister, I forget his name, Columbia professor of economics,
Kaushik Basu.
Kaushik Basu had a very interesting working paper on this issue. So this issue has been around for a while, but there is no resolution in sight.
Okay. Yes, Katyayani.
My question is to Swati.
Katyayani, if you could introduce yourself for the benefit of all the participants.
I'm Katyayani Chamraj. I represent an organization called Civic Bangalore. We work on urban governance and other rights-based issues. My question is to Swati. Is your portal or your website only for a cathartic kind of, steam letting? Or do you also have links there on how they can avoid paying the bribe by maybe linking it to Sakala website and, telling them which are the services they don't need to pay a bribe for? And is there a link helping those people not to pay a bribe if in future, to educate them about what are the services available to not to pay a bribe, like Sakala?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Yes, we do actually.
One supplementary question. Have you done any analysis of whether your website has helped to curb corruption in a way? Has it led to any decrease in corruption?
So let me answer the first one. The first one is on saying how not to pay a bribe. We have, I think today about 4,000 how-tos, which is essentially giving you information in the most easy of ways, linking you to forms that you're supposed to fill. And because I think you're absolutely right. Part of the reason a lot of people end up paying the bribe is because they don't know what the process is. So if I go to a land registration department and I say, here are all my documents as I understand it, and suddenly the officer might say on the other side of the table, where's your 3A form? I don't even know what that 3A form is. And you say, I don't know, can I give it to you now? You say, no, you come back in a month. You step away from the table and there's a tout there who's saying, I'll help you, I know this 3A form. And you have to make a choice at that point to say, do I give in and just make sure that my transaction gets done today, because it's already been 2 years since I've been chasing up on this, and just pay the bribe and get it done? Or do I, say no? And so part of our whole approach in I Pay the Bribe as we've gone is to try and empower the citizen with information on each of these transactions. So there's a whole bunch of information there, a whole bunch of how-tos. You also get informed because you're able to see other people's experiences in the same transaction type under the same kind of a department. So you get to learn what other people's experiences are because you see the reports in that by city. So this is how we have it. In terms of the impact, I think that the metrics that we have for impact, given that it's an anonymous site and we don't want to violate people's anonymity, I think there are very clear cases where people have reported and told us thank you. People have reported saying after coming into your site, we have resisted. So those are very direct ways by which we know. But in an anonymous site, it's very hard because how do you measure the impact? So the proxies for that is simply the traffic. Is simply the traffic on the site itself, the traffic on the number of people who are registering to be on the site. So earlier we didn't even do any registrations because how do you do in an anonymous? Now people are starting to register on our site, so they're giving us their data. And the third is the number of people who come and hit on the how-tos. So clearly they're finding value on this. So those are our proxies for saying what is the impact of the size. We are like, just in the Alexa rankings and just in terms of everything else, we're hitting the ball right out of the park. So clearly there's a value. So that's the biggest, our audience is our key, ultimately the arbiter of how valuable we are or not. So that's the way we look at it. However, there's a second thing that we've now started. We've started giving people the ability to report and say, I want to share this story. With the city department, with the higher authority in the department, with the vigilance officer in that state, and with the media. Now that requires a higher bar, which means you now have to disclose who you are, not on the site, but to the I Paid a Bribe, back end. And we are finding that about 40% of the people who are reporting are actually choosing to stay anonymous, and they're giving us their information. We have an authentication, verification mechanism. So we are finding that a lot of people are actually choosing to do that. And from our end, we are now sending it, city by city, department by department, we're actually sending these reports and saying, this is what has come onto our site, and if you want to take action, we'd be happy to move forward on this and take this forward with you. So that's the other thing that is happening. But here, this act is going to be very detrimental, because if people are now going to have greater fear that I am now culpable because, I paid a bribe to get my service, this is going to be a real problem.
So
Just to speak up for Kaushik Basu's paper, which I thought was quite a seminal paper. I mean, he makes a distinction between sort of wholesale bribery, bribe giving for a concession or a contract, something that you shouldn't normally get through normal processes, and harassment bribes. And I think given the fact that it'd be very difficult to, in any event, stamp out harassment bribes through the legal system because of delays in prosecution, and the fact that you're paying a harassment bribe to get something that you should legitimately get, I think there is some merit in Kaushik Basu's suggestion that we decriminalize harassment bribes, retail bribes. That's just my personal view, but I do worry about some of the perverse effects of criminalizing it doubly in some of the amendments that may be coming up.
Sure. So I've seen 3 show of hands, so we really have to stop with that. We'll take all 3 questions and then we'll have the panelists comment on it. Can we go in the order of Ashwin Mahesh, then Alok Srivastav, and then Shankaran? Please introduce yourselves and ask your question. Thank you. Or make a comment. You're getting it.
I'm Ashwin. I work on a variety of media, technology, politics issues here in the city. Hi Vikram, good to see you again. There are 2 things I wanted to point out. One is that there is corruption that happens in services and activities, governance activities that are widely available, and there isn't really a shortage of them. Everybody's entitled to a passport. Everybody's entitled to a kind of electricity connection and so on and so forth. But there's a lot of things for which there is actually a scarcity. And retail corruption is a point at which this scarcity becomes manifest. So when you start to go after the retail corruption without addressing the scarcity, there isn't enough low-income housing, there isn't enough schooling, good schooling. So when you start to go after the retail corruption without addressing the scarcity, you can only make yourself feel better about going after the corruption, but fundamentally it's going to show up somewhere else. It's not going to go away. And so you have to think about this a little bit. The second thing goes back to, I don't know who said this, perhaps Vikram, which is that a lot of these responses have been in the wake of extraordinary developments in political circles in various countries. But they also have the risk of overreach. Because they come about in those circumstances, they tend to sweep into the wake of their ambit a variety of institutions that ought not to be treated on par with government institutions. There's a tendency to treat NGOs, private institutions that are occasionally aided by the government, even institutions in which government entities like LIC have a small stock holding, all of them on par with the government of Karnataka or the government of India. And I wonder whether there's ever been any study on what the consequences of such overreach are. Because again, such overreach impacts you on the supply side. If people perpetuate scarcity further because they're sort of, don't want to be over-regulated by government, that is also a problem. We need to think about these things.
I'm Alok Srivastav from CMS, which is an independent research organization, and we do a lot of offline large-scale sample surveys with households to capture their perception and experience with public services. And it's a suggestion also, and you can think of as a question, that apart from I paid bribe, you can expand your site to include also people who were asked bribe but didn't pay. Because there are a lot of cases that we have come across in our sample surveys that they were asked for a bribe but they didn't pay. And also there are a section of people who used influence rather than paying cash to get their work done. And many of these people didn't avail the services because they had no money. And when I say offline services, most of our surveys have been to the households who live in villages, who don't have access to mobile phones or internet services. So there we have come across number of cases, and the percentage ranges between 5% to 11% of the total people who have paid bribe. And this is as huge as 2/3 or the 50% of the sample that we covered have paid bribe in a year or so in different services. So this is just a suggestion and comment.
Last question from Shankaran.
I'm Shankaran. I work for a IT services company by name Mindtree. The scale of corruption is so high that the entire panel, the question is for the panel, because a lot of focus is on how to defend ourselves. The human psychology is to adopt measures to defend yourself for various things which you feel intimidated or threatened. So I feel there should be another measures which is not talked about in this forum. I feel is fostering something which is good. Like we are talking about transparencies, talking about ethics, we are talking about what morals. See, all this has to come through the youth of the country. Madam Shalini, you have made an excellent presentation on the government initiatives. I think the fast tracking of these initiatives also requires fostering of good practices, good teaching the students. We have NCCs to train them on the physical aspects. Now, this sort of movement should be started in the schools, curriculums, where they can be taught about transparencies, morals, ethics, because there is no formal way of presenting this.
Sure, sure.
No, I just wanted to, one point, a very brief point. I didn't do justice to Kaushik's logic, and that is, what Kaushik is basically saying is that if you decriminalize giving a bribe, that allows you to then report it subsequently. It breaks the collusive nexus between a bribe giver and a bribe taker. So what he suggests is that you triply or quadruply penalize the bribe taker, but you lift the bonus from the bribe giver, let that person give a bribe, and then promptly report it to, say, a website like Swati's for action. And I think that is an interesting logic, and I just wanted to clarify that since I didn't do justice to his argument. Thanks very much.
NSS, all schools children, resident welfare associations, women's self-help group, youth clubs, consumer forum, industry association. I mean, we've not left a single organization. And it's spreading, but it will take time. But I personally, I said, I am not happy with what I've done. There's so much more to be done, and there, the partnership matters. The more and more the citizen groups participate, it will be sustainable. So whether I'm there, or this CM is there, or this government is there, it doesn't matter. The system should be in place.
You know, there is the best institution of all for this values creation. That's the family, and I think it begins with that.
I don't think it's a matter for generations. I think it's there is latent civic virtue. Obviously, this country has a long tradition of moral action in politics. And I think it's a question of really tapping into that. I think most polities depend on a residue of civic virtue. Why is it that, as my old professor Karl Deutsch used to mention in class, why is it that you stop at a red light when there's no one there watching you? It's because of a certain trust in the system and in your fellow citizen. And of course, if you go back to the Federalist Papers, I mean, there's this big debate between Madison and Hamilton. On the one hand, civic virtue is the rock of government, and then Hamilton being the skeptic and saying, no, but we also have to divide power so that we don't create incentives for corruption, or Tocqueville's arguments about self-interest are rightly understood. And going back to Indian political philosophy, the whole question of dharma, which comes out in the Arthashastra, doing one's duty to oneself and to others. And I think these are latent, very powerful elements in the system that constitute the basis of a moral polity. I think an activist, sort of activist attempts by different religious groups, Muslim, Hindu, Christian, even secular, to promote this kind of civic morality, combined with a thrust in primary school and secondary school and university, courses on civic virtue, on political philosophy, on these kinds of things, plus a more generalized approach to this, would help. I think you would see changes, because all of these notions are latent and very powerful.
Trust in social capital is an extremely contentious construct.
Mike.
None of the sociologists accept it. None of the sociologists. Trust as a component or a construct of social capital is an extremely contentious issue. In fact, the World Bank, Michael never accepted it. So none of the sociologists really are comfortable with trust in social capital. And it was Putnam only who started it. Social capital is one of my strong themes in my doctoral studies. So, I mean, it is important, but you have to be careful when using trust for social capital.